There are moments in life when everything goes silent, when the noise of the world fades and all that remains is you and the weight of a decision that feels like the only one left to make. He stood there on that bridge, winter wind cutting through his coat like it was made of paper, staring down at the frozen river below, and for the first time in months, he felt something close to peace, the terrible peace of someone who has already let go. His breath came out in clouds that disappeared into the night, just like he was about to disappear, and nobody would even notice, because nobody had noticed him in so long that he'd become a ghost in his own life. The job was gone, the people were gone, the hope was gone, and what was left was just this. A man, a bridge, and the kind of cold that doesn't just freeze your body but reaches inside and turns everything you ever believed about yourself into ice. But then, in that exact moment, something moved in the corner of his vision, something that shouldn't have been there at all. A fox, not running away like animals do when they sense human presence, but walking toward him, slowly, deliberately through the snow. Its amber eyes locked on his with an intensity that made him forget, just for a second, what he was about to do. And in that second, everything changed. If this part touched you, breathe deeply with me. Sometimes salvation arrives in the form we least expect, in the moment we've already given up on being saved. The fox didn't leave, and that was the strangest part. The part that made no logical sense, but somehow made all the emotional sense in the world, because sometimes what we need most isn't logic, but a reason to stay that has nothing to do with reason at all. He stepped back from the edge, not because he suddenly wanted to live again, but because this small creature was looking at him like he mattered, like his presence on this earth was significant enough to warrant attention. And when you've spent months feeling invisible, even the gaze of an animal can resurrect something inside you that you thought was buried forever. The fox turned and started walking, pausing every few steps to look back, and without understanding why, he followed. Through empty streets, where his footsteps echoed against closed shop windows, past homes glowing with warmth he no longer believed he deserved, the fox led him away from that bridge and into the night. And with each step, the terrible peace began to crack, replaced by something unfamiliar and almost painful: curiosity. Where was this animal taking him? Why hadn't it run away? And deeper still, beneath those questions, a whisper he couldn't quite silence. What if this means something? They walked for what felt like hours, the man and the fox, two creatures who shouldn't have been together, but somehow were. And when they finally stopped outside an old abandoned building where the fox disappeared into the shadows, he realized he'd walked further from death than he had in months. If you've ever followed something you couldn't explain, write "I followed" in the comments. Sometimes the path forward isn't clear, but it's there, waiting for us to take just one more step. The fox came back the next day, and the day after that, and slowly, without him consciously deciding to do it, he started leaving food outside that abandoned building, started checking to see if the creature was there, started structuring his days around these brief encounters, with something wild and free that somehow chose to keep returning to him. And here's what nobody tells you about healing. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets and transformation. It sneaks in through the smallest cracks, disguised as routine, as responsibility, as the simple act of remembering to buy food for a fox, which means remembering to buy food for yourself too, which means getting out of bed, which means choosing to exist for one more day. He started noticing things again. The way snow caught light, the sound of his own footsteps, the warmth of coffee in his hands, these tiny details that had ceased to register when he'd already made peace with ending. The fox became more than an animal. It became proof that connection was still possible, that something in this world still saw him, still chose him, still believed his presence mattered enough to show up for. But late at night, when the darkness pressed in and the old thoughts returned like unwelcome guests. He couldn't help but wonder if he was losing his mind, if grief and loneliness had conjured this creature from his desperation, if the universe had taken pity on him and sent a messenger, or if this was all just beautiful, meaningless coincidence. And did it matter? Did it matter if the fox was fate or chance, magic or biology, as long as it had pulled him back from the edge and given him a reason to wake up tomorrow? Leave a sign here if this turn moved something in you. Sometimes we don't need to understand why we were saved. We just need to accept that we were. Then one morning the fox was gone, and the absence hit him harder than he expected, harder than it should have, because by then he'd built his entire fragile recovery around those daily visits, around the silent understanding between a broken man and a wild animal who'd somehow found each other in the middle of winter. He searched for days, calling out into empty lots, leaving food that went uneaten, retracing their paths through the snow. But the fox had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving behind only questions and the undeniable fact that he was still here, still breathing, still wanting to find it, which meant he was still choosing life even when life felt empty again. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the fox hadn't come to stay forever, but to stay just long enough to interrupt the ending he'd written for himself and give him space to write a different one, to prove that even in our darkest hour, something can reach through the void and pull us back, whether we call it grace or coincidence, or the universe's strange timing. He still thinks about it every day. Why that fox appeared when it did. Why it stayed as long as it needed to, and not a moment longer. Whether it's out there somewhere still carrying that same mysterious purpose for someone else standing on their own bridge, contemplating their own frozen river. Part of him wants to believe it was sent, that there's meaning in the timing, that his life was deemed worth saving by forces he doesn't understand. But another part knows it doesn't matter why it happened, only that it did, and that he's here now, changed, carrying the memory of those amber eyes that looked at him like he mattered when he couldn't remember mattering at all. But here's what he can't shake, what keeps him awake some nights with a feeling he can't quite name. There was something in the way the fox looked at him that last time, something knowing, almost satisfied, as if its work was complete. And he wonders, in the space between sleep and waking, if salvation always comes with questions we're not meant to answer, with mysteries that change us precisely because they remain unsolved. Was there something more he was supposed to learn? Something he missed in those brief, life-altering encounters? The answer might be closer than he thinks, hidden in the patterns we don't see, in the connections we overlook, in the next chapter of a story that's still being written.